The night the power went out in our old apartment building, the cold slipped in like a thief, seeping through the thin walls and settling into every corner of the living room. I sat on the worn couch with a blanket pulled tight around my shoulders, staring at the dark window where streetlights flickered weakly against the glass. My roommate, Lena, appeared in the doorway holding a candle, her silhouette soft against the faint glow. She said her hands were freezing. Then, without waiting for permission or explanation, she crossed the room, knelt beside me, and slid those icy fingers straight under my shirt, pressing them against the warm skin of my stomach. The shock of it stole my breath. Not just the cold, but the sudden closeness, the quiet trust of the gesture, the way her palms flattened and stayed there, as if they had always belonged in that secret place. In that single moment, the entire shape of our lives together shifted, and nothing afterward felt the same. If you believe in kindness and second chances, take a second right now to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support keeps stories like this alive. I had moved into the apartment 6 months earlier, carrying more than boxes. My previous relationship had ended in a quiet, exhausting collapse that left me convinced I was better off alone. Work had become a relentless grind of late nights and early mornings, the kind that hollowed a person out until even simple conversations felt like effort. Lena had answered the roommate ad with a short message and a quiet smile when we met. She was a graduate student, finishing her thesis, soft-spoken, neat, the sort of person who left notes on the fridge about shared groceries and never played music loud enough to disturb anyone. We lived side by side in polite distance. We exchanged good mornings and good nights. We divided the rent and the chores. We never asked each other the questions that mattered. I told myself that was exactly what I wanted. Distance was safety. Distance meant no one could leave again and take pieces of me with them. Winter arrived early that year. The heating in the building was unreliable, and the nights grew sharp. One evening, the lights failed completely, plunging the whole floor into darkness. I had been sitting alone, phone battery already low, trying to finish a report by the thin beam of a flashlight. Lena came out of her room carrying the candle and the quiet announcement that her hands were freezing. She sat close enough that I could smell the faint scent of the lotion she used. Something clean and simple. When her hands found the hem of my shirt and slipped underneath, the cold was startling, almost painful at first. My body tensed. Hers stayed still. She did not pull away. She simply held her palms against my skin, letting the warmth transfer slowly, as if the only thing that mattered in the world was the gradual thawing of her fingers. I could have said something light, something that would have restored the careful boundary we had kept. Instead, I stayed silent. The candle flame trembled. Outside, wind pressed against the windows. Inside, her hands began to warm, and with that warmth came a strange, unexpected calm. She rested her forehead against my shoulder for a moment, then lifted her head and looked at me in the low light. There was no laughter in her eyes, no awkward joke waiting, only a quiet honesty I had never seen from her before. She whispered that she had been cold for a long time, longer than the weather, longer than the apartment. The words landed between us like something fragile and heavy at once. That night, we talked until the candle burned low. She told me about the thesis that had stopped making sense months earlier, about the advisor who kept pushing deadlines she could no longer meet, about the family back home who still expected her to be the strong one, the successful one, a one who never needed help. I listened, and for the first time in a long while I did not calculate how much of myself to give away. I, simply, stayed present. When she finally pulled her hands free, the skin of my stomach felt marked by the memory of her touch. She stood, thanked me in a voice so soft, it nearly disappeared, and returned to her room. I sat in the dark long after the candle went out, feeling the shape of something new and uncertain beginning to form. The days that followed were careful. We still moved around each other with the same polite routines, yet everything carried a different weight. I noticed the way she lingered in the kitchen a little longer in the mornings. I noticed how she asked if I wanted tea when she made her own. Small things, ordinary things, but they felt like bridges being built one board at a time. I began leaving the living room light on when I stayed up late so she would not come home to darkness. She started setting an extra plate when she cooked, even on nights I said I had already eaten. We were learning each other in the quiet spaces between words. Then the real cold arrived, the kind that settles into the bones and refuses to leave. Lena's thesis deadline loomed. Her advisor sent increasingly sharp emails. She stopped sleeping properly. Dark circles appeared under her eyes. She moved through the apartment like someone carrying glass, careful and distant. One evening, I found her sitting on the floor of her room surrounded by printed pages, the candle from that first night burning again, even though the power had long since returned. Her hands were clenched in her lap. When I sat beside her, she did not look up. She only said, almost to herself, that she did not know how to keep going. The admission cost her something visible. Her shoulders folded inward. I did not offer empty reassurance. I did not tell her everything would be fine. Instead, I reached for one of the pages and asked her to explain the part that troubled her most. We spent hours that night, walking through the tangled arguments of her work. I knew almost nothing about her field, but I knew how to listen, how to ask the questions that sometimes unlock a stuck mind. Somewhere in the middle of it, her hands found mine, not under a shirt this time, just resting on top of the papers, fingers cold again from tension. I held them until the cold eased. When she finally closed the laptop and looked at me, there was gratitude in her face, and something deeper, something that looked like the first fragile shoot of trust. My own struggles had not vanished. Work still demanded more than I had to give. Old memories still rose at unexpected hours. There were nights I lay awake replaying the end of the relationship that had left me so guarded, the final conversation that had been polite, and final and devastating in its quietness. Lena noticed. She never pressed. She simply appeared with tea or a quiet presence on the couch when the silence in my room grew too loud. One night, long after midnight, she found me standing at the kitchen window staring at the empty street. She did not ask what was wrong. She only stood beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched, and said that sometimes the coldest places inside a person needed another person's warmth more than they needed answers. Then she took my hand and guided it under the edge of her own sweater, pressing my palm against the side of her ribs where her heart beat steady and alive. The gesture was a mirror of that first night, a quiet return of the same trust. I felt the heat of her skin and the steady rhythm beneath it, and for a moment the old loneliness loosened its grip. Weeks passed. The thesis reached its final draft. My work project that had threatened to break me finally closed. The apartment felt less like a shared space of careful distance, and more like a place two people were choosing to inhabit together. Yet the hardest stretch still waited. Lena received the formal response from her committee. The thesis needed major revisions. The timeline was brutal. She read the email standing in the living room, the phone trembling slightly in her hand. Then she sat down hard on the couch and covered her face. The sound that came from her was not quite a sob, not quite silence. It was the sound of someone who had given everything and still fallen short. I sat beside her. I did not speak at first. I simply stayed. When she finally lowered her hands, her eyes were red and exhausted. She said she did not know if she had another fight left in her. I told her the truth as I understood it, that she did not have to fight alone anymore, that the person sitting next to her had already decided the struggle was shared. She looked at me for a long time, searching for any sign that the words were only kindness offered out of pity. She found none. Slowly, deliberately, she reached under my shirt again, not because her hands were cold this time, but because she needed the reminder of warmth, of presence, of the quiet promise that had begun on a dark night when the power failed. Her fingers rested against my skin, and I covered them with my own hand, holding them there. The revisions took everything. Late nights stretched into early mornings. Coffee became a constant companion. There were moments of sharp frustration when pages were deleted and rewritten, moments when doubt rose so high it threatened to drown the work entirely. Through all of it, we moved as a team. I learned the shape of her arguments well enough to spot weak places. She learned the patterns of my stress well enough to notice when I needed silence, or when I needed to talk. The intimacy that had begun with cold hands under a shirt deepened into something steadier and more profound. It was not only physical closeness, though that closeness continued in quiet, private moments that asked for nothing beyond mutual care. It was the daily decision to remain present for each other's hardest hours. One evening near the end of the revision period, the heat failed again. The apartment grew cold. We piled blankets on the couch and sat together under them, a candle between us for old time's sake. Lena's hands found their way under my shirt once more, seeking warmth, seeking the familiar contact that had become a language of its own. She rested her head against my chest and spoke softly about the fear that still lived in her, the fear that even after all the work, the committee might still say no. I told her that whatever the outcome, the person she had become through the struggle was already enough. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said that for the first time in years she believed someone when they said those words. The confession felt larger than the room. The day the final version was submitted, we both stood in the kitchen staring at the confirmation email, as if it might disappear. Relief arrived slowly, then all at once. Lena turned to me with tears already falling, not of sadness this time, but of the pure, overwhelming release that follows a long battle. She stepped into my arms and held on, as if the ground itself might shift. I held her back with the same intensity. In that embrace, every careful distance we had once maintained dissolved completely. We had crossed into something neither of us had planned, and both of us now needed. The committee's response arrived 2 weeks later. The thesis was accepted. The revisions had been thorough enough, the arguments strong enough. Lena read the letter twice, then a third time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into disappointment. When she finally accepted their truth, she laughed and cried at the same time, a sound so full of life it filled the entire apartment. That night, we celebrated with the simplest meal we could manage, and the candle that had witnessed so much already. Afterward, sitting close on the couch, she slid her hands under my shirt one last time that evening. Not because they were cold, but because the gesture had become our private language of gratitude and belonging. I covered her hands with mine and felt the steady warmth of her skin, the quiet proof that two people who had once lived side by side in careful isolation had chosen, instead, to keep each other warm through the longest winter either of us had known. Looking back, I understand that the real story did not begin with freezing hands or a power outage. It began with two people who had learned to survive by keeping their deepest needs hidden and who slowly, carefully, allowed those needs to be seen. The challenges we faced were ordinary in their details and enormous in their weight: the fear of failing, the memory of loss, the exhaustion of carrying everything alone. What changed was not the size of the challenges, but the decision to face them together. Kindness arrived in small, repeated acts. Second chances arrived every time one of us chose presence over retreat. The night Lena first slid her cold hands under my shirt was only the opening note of a longer, deeper music that neither of us had known how to play alone. If this story has touched your heart in any way, if it reminded you of someone who once needed warmth, or of a time when kindness changed the shape of your own life, please take a moment now to like the video, leave a comment sharing what stayed with you, and subscribe to Kindness Corner so more stories of quiet courage and second chances can reach the people who need them. Your engagement keeps this channel alive and helps others find the same hope. Before the ending, I want to ask one special thing of you. In the comments, write the name of one person who once warmed your life when everything felt cold, or simply write the word warmth. If you prefer to keep the memory private, reading those words reminds all of us that none of us walk through winter alone. The apartment is warmer now, both in temperature and in spirit. Lena finished her degree and began the next chapter of her work. I learned that the careful walls I had built after heartbreak were not the protection I believed them to be. They were only another form of cold. We still live together, though the word roommate no longer fits what we have become. On nights when the wind rises and the old building creaks, one of us will sometimes reach for the other under a shared blanket, hands seeking the familiar warmth of skin, and the simple contact will say everything that needs saying. We have learned that the deepest connections often begin in the smallest, most unexpected gestures, and that the courage to stay present for another person's cold can slowly thaw the frozen places inside ourselves as well. The story continues every ordinary day we choose kindness over distance. Every quiet moment we decide that second chances are worth the risk. And in that ongoing choice, the night the power failed and cold hands found warmth, under a shirt remains the quiet beginning of everything that followed. A reminder that even the deepest winter can end when two people decide together to keep the candle burning.